Thank you so much, Joshua, for coming here today. And I'm so glad to be able to speak to you because when I heard about your experience regarding your spirituality experience and your journey with Sadhguru, of course, we are coming into that. And specifically about your experience in Kailash, I thought, no, I have to speak to you. And thank you once again for coming here. So, first thing I would like to definitely ask you is who is this person who is sitting in front of me who was, maybe 2 decades before? How did this journey begin and what brought you into spirituality? Who were you at that time?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm always a little surprised at the response to the interview I did with Stefan, but I'm excited to be on this with you and share whatever I have to share. So, thank you for that. Now, there's like a short story, a long story, and a longer story. So I'll probably go in the middle and do a little bit of the medium to long story, but I was raised very Christian, generic, Southern US, Southern, that means something in the US, Southern Christian in a family that was very conservative. And a couple of things happened. When I was in college, I was riding my bike. I raced triathlons and I was riding my bike and I got hit by a car. And I had one of those moments of I was going straight and the guy took a left. And so I could see for about 2 to 3 seconds that I was going to get hit and there was nothing I could do about it. And then I just remember very, very slowly flying through the air, hitting my helmet. If I didn't have a helmet on, I'd be dead. And then lying on the ground and the ambulance coming and all these things happening. Fortunately, I didn't get injured too badly, but it really made me understand or look at life as finite, if that makes sense. Brushed with death. And before that, I was always into athletics. You know, at the time I was racing Ironmans and studying for the MCAT to go to medical school. So then 2 years later, I graduated. I actually got a double degree. And so I graduated in business and biology. And I was applying for medical school. And my brother got sent to war in Iraq. And he went over and was fighting in Iraq. And so I saw all the things that the government was saying. I saw all the things that these people in charge were saying. And some of them were blatant lies, and some of them were just seemingly deliberate deceptions. And it made me start questioning all the things that I'd held for granted, held as true. So around that time, I got an offer to race triathlons with a team. And so this would be professional, but it's kind of like third division or fourth division. So you're not really making money, you're not really making expenses, but you're part of a team and some of your gear and stuff is taken care of. So I decided to do that. I looked at it and I thought, well, medical school can wait. I'll race triathlons and I can go to medical school when I'm a little bit older. So that happened. And for a while, that was kind of my rebellion, is to not go to medical school, to not be on the path that I was on and to go race triathlons instead. But I was still doing a whole lot of exercise. I was still partying quite a bit. And in 2005, I had an experience where I was actually driving home from a club. I was driving to a club. I'd been out, or I was going to go out partying, and I was all dressed up to go to a club. And I came across this scene in the road where there was a car wreck. And this girl was like on top, kind of hanging out over her boyfriend, while the guy who had hit him was calling 911. They had tried to cross the road in the middle of the night. The driver never saw them. And I have a little bit of first aid experience. I have a little bit of life saving. So I stopped to see if there was anything I could do. And this kid, probably 15 or 16, had been hit by the car. And I came and his legs were twisted and he had this shard of glass sticking out of his forehead like that. And I just looked at him, and at that point it was well beyond what I knew what to do. So I just basically stabilized his neck, and he kind of came to and started trying to get up and move and run. And that's where you can get really injured. And so I basically just held him down, didn't let him stand up, and stabilized until the ambulance got there. And I just remember the blood was pooling on the street, and you could see it in the yellow of the streetlights. The streetlights here are all this kind of orangish yellow, and it was this deep maroon, and I knew he was dying. Or I knew he was very close to dying. I didn't know how he could survive that. So I just sat with him for about 3 or 4 minutes, and basically the ambulance came. He had lost a lot of blood, and they took over. And I remember I just went and sat in my car, and I had blood on me, all my club clothes and all that sort of stuff. And going clubbing seemed so dumb. Going and partying seemed so stupid. And I turned around and I went home, left a couple of voicemails on my friends' phones, and didn't show up. A few years before I had started questioning Christianity and all the things, all the answers that it provides, simply from the fact of the world is so diverse. The world is so huge, and the universe is so huge. And this idea that the universe is just about us, and as humans, just about us as humans. And then this story being told is absolute truth. And I always had questions about it. So I started doubting a few years back, and I stopped going to church. But this incident with the car and the kid, it made me realize, or made me start looking at things a little bit differently. Start looking at, okay, I'm racing and I'm doing these things and I'm doing pretty well, but it's still not enough. Somehow it's still not enough. And I don't have the capacity to enter a church and just believe what someone tells me. If I look at something and I see questions that are unanswered, I can't help myself from answering them.
And how
I'm sorry, I can't.
were you during that time when this experience?
So I started questioning about 21, 22. That was kind of when I got hit by the car. And then my brother got sent to war when I was 23. And then I came across this accident and basically had this kid die in my hands at 25. So I started reading. I read Autobiography of a Yogi. I read all sorts of new age stuff. The Secret was big back then. I read basically anything I could get my hands on. I started reading, and it all seemed interesting, but it seemed theoretical in terms of nobody seemed to actually know. People seemed to be looking at it and coming to conclusions and telling stuff, but there seemed to be no deeper understanding. It seemed to be just people playing with their minds and not coming to a sense of the truth. And so this continued for about 2 to 3 years. I was reading books on, past lives. I was reading books on, what's it called? Like energy healing, shamanism, these sorts of things. And so in 2007, I keep saying 20 because it's 2020 now, but you can't say that with 2007. So in 2007, I had a great year. I had an amazing year racing, and was going faster than I ever thought. It looked like I was making world championships. Looked like everything was falling in place. I was in a great relationship. And then, so I was working a job coaching swimming, and I loved it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being with the kids. And it was lined up so I could train and work, and there was no conflict. Then all of a sudden, my boss just quit. And it's not like a normal job. If my boss quits, I've been working with these kids. And so if I don't pick up the slack, then these kids are left without any coach. So when I've been working with some of these kids for 3 or 4 years, so I kind of was put in a position where I had to choose between having the best race of my life and making sure the kids are taken care of. And that was really a difficult decision. And I kind of halfway did both. You know, I feel like I fulfilled my responsibilities to the kids, but wasn't fully there for them. And I also went and had a race, but it wasn't a great race. And it really just kind of threw me over the edge with some of this stuff, because I realized I wasn't quite as strong as I thought I was. I realized I wasn't quite as invincible as I thought I was. And I had basically pushed aside some of those questions and just raced. When you're biking 300 miles a week, when you're running 80 miles a week and swimming, 5 to 10 miles a week, there's not much time. So I was just like putting my life into that. So all these questions came back, and I went and took an energy healing course, and I actually had a big experience from it. Started training in that. It's the 4 winds, and I had some big experiences. I had some things where I can't explain what happened or why it happened in any way, shape, or form. But I also, like I said, read Autobiography of a Yogi. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. I did the Self-Realization Fellowship stuff, some of the classes, and it's beautiful and wonderful. But once again, it just seemed like theory. And Paramahansa Yogananda has been gone for quite a long time. So I went and had a great experience with ayahuasca, took 4 nights. Then I went and did 3 nights, and I had this almost transcendent experience on the 2nd night. And on the 3rd night, I was going to go down and train to be a shaman, live in the jungle for a while, and learn how to do ayahuasca ceremonies. But I had this weird experience with kind of the spirit of ayahuasca during the last ceremony, and it told me not to come. It told me my path was elsewhere, and basically don't come back. So that was a little bit of a shock. And I was kind of really let down. I was thinking I had found something. I had found my path. And that's when Sadhguru came into my life. I happened to read a book of his on one of the bus rides around Cusco. And some of the stuff he says is stuff that's been said elsewhere. Some of the stuff is kind of new, but some of the stuff he says is stuff that's been elsewhere. But he seemed to have some sort of authentic experience. It wasn't like he's repeating something that's been repeated. It's been repeated. It's been repeated. He seemed to have some knowledge. I got back, went online, as one does after this, and found that there was a class in LA. I was living in Park City, so it was about an hour flight. And I knew someone in LA. So I went and stayed with her and took the inner engineering class. And it was good. You're learning stuff. You're learning the practice of Shambhavi. And it was, I can't say from my experience it was anything incredible until initiation happened. And when we got initiated for Shambhavi, it was almost like an ayahuasca experience in terms of the intensity of, I'll use the word energy, the intensity of the experience was very, very similar with some notable changes to ayahuasca. And when I got done, I just sat there and I was like, okay, this is something. There's something here, and I don't know what it is. And so for anything, I'll throw myself into something. And most of the time what happens in my life is I'll throw myself into something, and then I'll do it long enough that I can get a sense for what it is and how far it'll take me, if that makes sense. So I would do something and I kind of get a sense of, okay, this is what I get out of it. This is what I have to give to it. This is what it will do for me. And many times I just throw myself into something for a period of time, and I just come to a realization and say, okay, this is what it is. This is the limitations of what it is. This isn't really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that doesn't have limitation. like as weird as that sounds, I'm looking for something that moves beyond everything. And so I started practicing Shambhavi. This was 2008. I got initiated in August. I went and did yogasanas and then BSP in October, and then decided to do Samyama. People talk about their BSP experiences. Mine wasn't. My participant experience wasn't anything great. I came back 2 times later and had a pretty transcendent experience as a volunteer. But as a participant, it was not. It was just I did it, and there was some fun stuff and some not fun stuff, and that's what it was for me. But especially volunteering, you could see what people went through, and then I went through some of the processes as a volunteer on my second time, and had a big experience. So BSP happened, and then I went and did, I don't know if it's still there. There's a 21-day yoga marga program for rejuvenation in India. And my body was a mess from all the sports I had done. It was really, really just sore all the time, tired all the time. I had insomnia, And so I went and did that. I remember I sat down with a brahmachari who was doing the intake, and she says, "Well, you're young. Why are you here?" And I started telling her insomnia, body hurts, always achy and tired. And she looks at me and says, "You're quite young for that to be happening." And I was like, "Yeah, I guess I am." So I did that. And then the way they used to do it is Shunya was only taught in India. So for Westerners, you would go over there, you would take a 4-day Shunya class, and then 3 days later step into Samyama. So it was quite the intense experience. And then at the end of Samyama, we stayed in silence for 3 days, and the Westerners stayed in silence for 3 days, and we climbed up Seventh Hill. And Seventh Hill was just beautiful and amazing, and sitting in Sadhguru's spot was incredible. And it was, I think there were something like 20 of us who went up, but me being an ex-athlete, I was the first one up the hill. So I got to go and kind of find the spot and sit there by myself for 10 or 15 minutes, and even just the nature of the place and the intensity of the place is incredible. So that's basically my story as to how I found it. So that was January 2000, or it must have been like February 2009. We got to do Mahashivaratri. We actually did the first, it's called Panchabhuta Kriya, but it was Panchabhuta Aradhana. And they came around and they said, "Do you guys want to do something in the Dhyana Linga before Mahashivaratri with Sadhguru?" Yeah, we do. That's definitely something we want to do. So we went and did that, and that was kind of insane because it was, no one had ever done it before, and it's so hard to describe experiences, right? Just what was going on in there. A lot of times for the first time, it can be a pretty crazy experience. And then I came back home. I was just sitting around kind of doing what I'd always done. And I was like, I need to really throw myself into this. So I went and I lived at Triple I for, must have been like 2 or 3 months. And then I happened to talk to Sadhguru after a BSP. And I was thinking of going back to grad school at that time. He told me to come to India for a while. So I went to India. They put me in a month of silence, and then I did 6 months of half-day silence and working with the homeschool kids.
So we'll pause over here because this part is, again, a very interesting part. So coming to this, whatever you said, of course, it feels like, you can imagine whatever you are saying, you can visualize you when there you did this. So in your 20s, you had full of your experiential learnings, if I may put it like that. So, and you are a person who loves to test it out yourself and then see whether it's working for you or not. So you went ahead and did the healing, the I can't even pronounce that properly.
Ayahuasca.
Yes, I've heard that a lot, but since I don't know about it, so tell me something. When that person told me this is not your path, did that person also tell you which is the path you were supposed to go or something? Did you ask that person over there?
So it wasn't a person. It
Okay.
was in the middle of this like deep psychedelic drug experience. And I was talking to this being that wasn't a person, wasn't even necessarily there.
This is all for the people who don't know what this experience is. So that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you take this, there's this chemical called DMT. It's dimethyltryptamine. I think it's dimethyltryptamine. And it's already in our bodies, right? It's already in our bodies. It's in many of the things that we eat. But our body, the enzymes in our body changes it to a form that's not psychoactive. So what they'll do is they have this inhibitor of the enzyme that's in this other plant, this tree, and then this vine. And ayahuasca literally means the vine of death. So they chop it up and they mix them together and they take and brew it and have this like big cauldron and brew it down to this gross mix of plant particles. And it's like this sludge that you drink and you drink it and then it'll take 30 minutes to kick in. And then the experience lasts 4 to 6 hours. And they think that when you die, DMT naturally gets released in the brain. There's a flood of DMT at the end of your life. And they think that that's what triggers the near-death experience stories, is that this thing kind of takes you elsewhere. And I remember the first time I took it, I was somewhere else and I was sitting there and it was like I was in the center of the universe and it was like pulsating and I had no connection to my body. I had no connection to where I was. And I remember thinking, what if I can't get back? I'm here, I'm somewhere else, but what if I can't get back? And then at some point, time changes. They call it time dilation. And so time changes. So it can seem like you're there for, how when you're really, really, really sick, time doesn't seem to add up. It can seem like it takes forever, but then also 3 days pass and you don't remember them. So it's kind of like that. It's similar to that. And so during one of these experiences, I remember I was away from my body. I could see my body over there. And there was this big being that was not really solid. It was kind of like this smoke and hazy, and I just had a conversation with it. And in the time, I didn't seem to ask what my path was. It just basically said there are ways to achieve these states without drugs. And so you go and do that.
So got it. Because I have heard from people who have experienced this as well, just like you mentioned, that experience lasts for some time when you are into it. But later on, when you get into your daily life, it just is not there. So you are back to square one. So you as a person, as a practical example, because you have tried so many things and then you went ahead and did your Shambhavi, of course, all the people who are yet and new to these terms, Shunya, Samyama, you can go to the website and you can check it out of Sadhguru's website. So when you did your Shambhavi, you mentioned this was same but intense. And so what made you continue this journey? What made you do the Shunya, then Samyama, then BSP before that, of course, all these things, one after the another?
I think it's the same reason I would, go and run Ironmans and go and, we do these adventure races where we go out into the wilderness and, have a compass and a map and have to find our way from place to place and be out there for 2 or 3 days. I was just that sort where it was like, I'm going to throw myself fully in it. Right. And Shambhavi, it has some great wonderful, amazing things. But I wasn't looking to have my life but a little better, if that makes sense. I was looking for answers to the questions I had about life that kept me up at night, the things that just didn't make sense. Like if you look at the solar system and how vast it is, just our solar system, how much empty space there is, how much we don't know just about our solar systems, heck, about our oceans. There's so much we don't know about our oceans. And if you really get into science, you realize there's so much we don't know about a whole lot of things. And we walk around thinking we know everything. And that bothers me. Not that we walk around thinking like we know everything, that we don't know. So the ignorance that we actually have, and that we don't really know how even any of this works, right? Like our bodies, our minds, anything. Like I ate a little bit about 30 minutes ago. I don't know how that turns into me. I don't know exactly the process. And I had this deep realization of how much I don't know. I remember I loved math. And so I took it into calculus 3. And that was at the point I realized that I could probably keep going, but I would be memorizing and taking a test. I would not understand it anymore, what was going on. And I still got something like 110 in the class. I don't know how you get 110 in a math class, but must have been graded on a curve. So, but I knew by the end of that class, I knew that I was memorizing things and figuring out how to plug it in for a test, right? Like there's a difference between someone who makes the phone and understands how the pieces of the phone works versus someone who can use the phone really well. And I was becoming the person who could just use the phone. Before that, I could understand the phone, right? So that's where I had these questions about what's going on with life, what is actually happening here. What is the reason for any of this? Like, why am I won a triathlon one time. It was the first triathlon I won. And I got to the finish line, stand up, got my medal. And about 10 minutes later, I went to my car and I was just like, is this it? Right? All this training, all this stuff I'm doing. And okay, I won. I finally achieved that. Is that it? Right? Like, what actually is this? So that's why I would throw myself into something like this, is because the questions are there, but I'm also that sort that's just going to like, okay, let's go.
Wow. Because what you just right now mentioned is that powerful question. Once you are done with a goal or a target that you have set, once you have achieved it, what after that? And you ask yourself the question, well, that's it. What next? So
Well, I think it's important. So when you're going for the goal, you throw yourself into it, right? Like if you want to make a movie, if you want to run a race, if you want to start a business, you throw yourself into it, but you reach a point where in a certain sense you've achieved it. And I think it's very important in life to take time at that point where you achieve success and really consider what you want. Really consider, is this still something? Say I start a business and I throw myself into it for 5 years and I sell it or make it into publicly traded or whatever myriad of options there are there. At that point, I've thrown so much of my energy and life into it. To sit down and say, what do I want now? What do I want now? And even in terms of marriage, in terms of any of these things, you say you get married, then you sit down and say, okay, well, what do I want? And do I really want, this? Do I want that? Even before marriage, I think it's probably important. But sitting down at every step and not with any answer in mind. Because a lot of people would say, you get to success in business and stop and take some time and look at what you want. And maybe you'll see it wasn't that important. Maybe you will. Maybe you'll see you want to do it more and grow it into a multi-billion-dollar business. Maybe you'll see that you want to pivot to some other business and build it. Maybe you want to stop and take 6 months in the wilderness, hiking the Appalachian Trail or something like that. There's no answer. But I think a lot of us stop asking the questions and live a life. I think Thoreau said it, to live an unexamined life where you're not, it doesn't need to be constant, right? Like once you set your mind on a goal, you can't sit there and waver. You won't get there. But once you reach a goal, you stop and you say, all right, is this something that I want to continue doing? Is this the way I want to continue living my life? Even in terms of spirituality, right? Say you want to go and do sadhana and stay for 7 months and do that. You do sadhana for 7 months and you sit and you say, okay, what is it I want next? What do I want to create out of life? What do I want for myself? What will fulfill me? Because that changes. And if it doesn't, if who I am and what I want doesn't change a year from now, it's a very stagnant life.
Absolutely. And this brings to the aspect that, yes, after you came to India, Sadhguru called you over here. So now please continue. How many years you have been with him in terms of every aspect, if you can, please continue.
Okay. So I went in 2009 in October. I was in silence for a month from October to November. Then I did half-day silence where I'd be in silence till 1 p.m., then go work with the homeschool kids for about, I feel like 5 or 6 months. I came back when the Anadi program was announced. And I was actually living in California with my buddy Christian, who also did the Anadi program. And then the Anadi program happened. It was intense. It was 3 months with Sadhguru. We got initiated into a different practice. And that practice, the point of it apparently was to concentrate our sanchita karma and work it out. So after that, I thought I was just going to go and do this and then go back to homeschool. After that, a couple of things happened during the program. About 3 weeks in, I got a call the volunteer came and said, you have a phone call. Now, we weren't supposed to have any contact with the outside world. So I'm thinking, well, what do you mean I have a phone call? My grandpa had died. He was the only grandparent I was really close with. Kind of my grandmother too, but she was a little bit insane. So I was really close with him and he had passed away. And they told me the deal is I could go to the funeral, but unfortunately, if you leave for 3 or 4 days, you can't come back. And that's just the nature of the process, right? Like it's a intense thing that he's trying to get done with us. You can't break the process and then re-enter it. I talked to my family and they said, if this is very important to you, if this is, the once in a lifetime thing you think it is, you go visit his grave when you come back. Stay there, do that, go visit his grave when you come back. So that happened. Then I didn't know this at the time. Actually, about a month later, my uncle died. So I didn't know that. I don't think my family contacted. I wasn't close to my uncle. He was unique. I'll say it like that. He's passed away, so I won't say anything bad about him. But he was unique. And then the last day we were doing the last 2 days we did this like intensive where we did these. So the Anadi practice, you can do them back to back. You don't have to give gap. You don't have to do that. And so we were doing this intensive where it was, 2 days, absolute silence. Before that, we were in working silence, which meant if we were volunteering, we could have conversation about volunteering. this was back to absolute silence. And we just get up in the morning, do sadhana, and then do like 5 or 6 of these practices. And it was exhausting. Like you do 1 or 2 of them, and then you'd like finish one, fall down, sleep for 5 minutes, get up, go again. And it was just like on, on. Well, in the middle of that, my friend Christian, he had he was a race car driver. And so he had a race to get to. So it was known that he would leave one day early. So apparently he went to the office, and at the office there was one of those little please call tags, those little notes. And it said, have Joshua call his family as soon as he's done with silence, family emergency. For some reason, he thought this would be a good idea to put on my pillow while I'm in silence, and I have 24 hours left of silence, and I can't call. So in my mind, all this is going through. I'm like, okay, so what happened? What's going on? Trying to focus where I'm at, not fully able to focus where I'm at. And I get done and call home, and my dad's in rehab. He's confronted a 40-year drinking problem. And so he was basically to the point where he probably wouldn't have made it another week or two if he had continued drinking, because he had just kind of gone off the cliff. So they checked him into rehab. My family was basically a mess because this was something we had dealt with, but we had never had to come to terms with. And then life just started happening. Like everything sped up. I look at that time, and how I describe it is it's like you're sitting under this waterfall trying to get a breath, and you're drowning, and you can just get enough to get one breath, and then you're back underwater, right? And everything's pounding on you, and then you get one breath. And that's how it felt for about, so I was still involved in Isha, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2012, I went and did silence for a month, and it was really, really intense. And I was miserable. And I actually, at that point, I kept up my practices, but I kind of took a step away from Isha. Started working on business, started working on acting, started acting, started doing these things. And actually ended up dating someone from 2013 to about 2016. But I kept up my practices the whole time. It was one of those things that I was doing my hatha, I was doing my kriya, I was doing everything. I don't even know why I stepped away. I like looking back, it was just like everything was so intense. And then when I went to the ashram, it made it more intense. And I couldn't handle that. I think that's more of what it is. It's like Sadhguru often says, if you give a pound of gold, even if you give a pound of gold to an ant, it'll squish it, right? And there were a lot of us, I think, that were going through these intense experiences where like life was just happening so fast. Like things were just coming at you so fast. And it seemed like when I went into silence for that period, I was pouring gas on the fire. It was like I just sped everything up even more. 2016, I applied for Hatha Yoga teacher training. I did not get in, which is a funny story because they told me I needed to go volunteer more. I was already volunteering. I couldn't get in touch with them to see if I could challenge what they were saying. So my buddy called me up and he says, let's go to Kailash. Like there's a small group trip with Kailash. It'll be about the same cost as if you're going to take 5 months off for Hatha Yoga teacher training as to do this 1 month trip, and you can keep working. And it was, I'll just leave that be. I don't need to go into that. So I ended up going to Kailash that year. The relationship had ended. It was a very tumultuous relationship. I can only look back and think that it probably was some level of karma I was working out, because it was one of those ones that we should have split, 2 months in. and went our separate ways. And we stuck around and tried to make it happen for 2.5 years. But so I went to Kailash,
So
kind of.
I'll pause you here because we are getting into the Kailash story now. So just like
Okay.
you mentioned, because you mentioned some really, really interesting and important points, and I get these questions a lot. So I would really like to highlight this to you because you have experienced that as well, right? You have
Mm-hmm.
experienced periods of silence, not just for 1 or 2 days, but months, right? And at the same time, you were so much intensely into sadhana, you were doing the volunteering, and there were also situations at your personal end, your own end, family end, and everything that was happening one after the another. And the analogy that you
Mm-hmm.
gave, that you were sitting under a waterfall and you were trying to grasp a breath. So if I put it in simple terms, for all the people who are into spiritual practices and they get so confused that, well, I am into spiritual practices, then why is it coming like, boom, 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 boom from everywhere? Things are happening one after the another, etc. And you just highlighted one point. You're burning off your karma as on a fast pace, like a racing track. And you're not just driving at a 10 kilometer per hour or something, you are at the fullest speed. So, what would you say with respect to that aspect for people who are still confused as to why is this happening with me? Why is, I am doing my sadhana, I'm doing my kriya and everything, yet so many painful things are happening one after the another.
I think there's several levels to it from my experience. One is you walk around the world, and if you really look, there are a lot of people deeply suffering, but completely unaware of it. There's a lot of miserable people that have no idea how miserable they are. And so, one thing that can happen is as you start getting into spiritual practices, you become aware of the misery. It becomes something that's in your perception about how miserable you are. And the awareness of how miserable you are, unfortunately, comes before your ability to fix it, or your ability to, or maybe not even your ability to fix it before it goes away. Um, if you're creating all sorts of problems in your mind unconsciously, and then suddenly you're conscious of what you're doing. Do you have a car? Do you drive? Have you ever been like driving along and you're just kind of thinking about something else and a little bit distracted, and then all of a sudden you tune into something that you barely missed somebody, or you almost hit something, or you've never had that happen?
No, I had. In fact, I
Okay,
almost slept away as well.
so yeah, I guess a better analogy would be like if you're driving a car and you're sleeping and you crash it, and then you wake up, like you have to deal with the crash. The sleeping was much more pleasant, but you're unconscious of it. So to me, as you become aware and you become aware of the suffering that's there, that can seem like that's what's happening. Oh, I did this and it got worse. Well, maybe not. Maybe you did this and you're aware of how bad it is and what you've been doing to yourself. Another thing is as you become more intense, everything happens more intensely. As your life becomes more intense. So even in terms of like riding a bike, okay, you're a kid, you ride those little bikes with those little wheels and you're going around and you're playing and you're going at this speed. If you're We got caught in a snowstorm, which our place doesn't snow but much, but in May, which is very warm, and it started out it's 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think would be about 28 degrees Celsius. And we climb up this mountain. At the top of the mountain, there's a snowstorm, right? So I'm on these little wheels, not very well dressed for this. And then we have to descend the mountain in the snowstorm. Climbing is one thing, but going downhill in a snowstorm where you're not sure if you'll get purchase, on the tires, going around like that, it's frightening. So if you want to play it safe, and there's nothing frightening about having a coffee and some breakfast and this and that. But if you're saying, I want life to be more intense, I want to know more about this life, I want to really push myself in any aspect, there's discomfort that comes with it. There's a certain, if you say you want to get really fit, right? If you want to get really fit, those first 6 to 9 weeks are going to be painful. And then even after that, it's going to be painful when you're in the gym. You just start noticing like, oh, I'm a little stronger. I feel a little better. Or if you're talking spirituality, certain practices are like, oh, everything's more intense, but I am able to handle this better. I am able to do this better, or I'm more managing the situations. Even to the point where, say you have someone who affects you and you always get in a fight, maybe you're able to bring the fights down from 3 per week to 1 per week, right? But that 1 per week seems more painful because you're more intensely aware of it. All these things are part of becoming aware, and part of what I think the spiritual process is becoming aware of just how dumb we are, right? Getting rid of our illusions, realizing how we get caught up in so many things that don't matter, and then saying, okay, well, what is this life about? If this life, I get married and then I get divorced, well, clearly it wasn't about the marriage, because that can end. All these things can end. And so then, is there something that doesn't end that's within us? And the truth is we don't know. There are stories that some people do know or have experienced that. But to us, it's just stories. We're blind. Okay. And so you start looking and you start really seeing at least the life that I am for what it is. And when you start seeing that, there's ugly pieces to it. You know, we want to think that I'm going to sit and do my meditation and then just be like blissed out and happy. And that may happen eventually. But at first you see somebody who's doing that. You see one of these Buddhist monks that's doing that. They've probably practiced for 20 years, 8 hours a day. Right? So that's the level of commitment that they've been given, or that they've given to get there, to get some level of mastery over the mental process, mastery over the physical process. So expecting it right away, like if you haven't taken any time to do it, you're going to be that 200 kg person that's going into the gym and expecting it to feel good right away. Where you got to look at it as, no, I haven't invested in myself in that way. There are people who it does happen in a beautiful way and it's phenomenal. Like you do see people who are like, I just took my Shambhavi and I was okay. And like, wonderful for you. The majority of us, you have to invest in yourself, you know, for the body, the hatha, you have to do that. So as you get older, you're not creaky and achy. And so you can sit better. So if you look at it and you say, because I went through a period from about 2018 to 2022 where it did seem like everything was happening at once. And I would call people up and I'd say, is this me? I'd call my friends up and I'd say, is this me? Am I doing this? Because I think that's the first question you ask. Am I actually creating these situations? And even in terms of the training last year, I told the people that I met there early, I remember I was sitting in a circle and I started to become close to some people. I was like, look, I attract chaos. I don't know what it is. And they laughed at me. And then about halfway through the training, they were like, what is going on with you? But for some reason, you know, I'd end up in situations that somebody is blowing up and melting down and having it, and it's directed at me. I think, in terms of my experience, I think that's over. But the only way I can understand it is looking at it and say, okay, there was some level of karmic substance I was working through. And what I didn't understand is that when I go and do silence and I intensify my practice, if I intensify everything, it also can speed up how quickly it moves through. Right? It can speed all that sort of stuff up as I understand it. So that being said, you know, there's something to be said about you do Surya Kriya and Shambhavi and maybe VSP, and then life is just kind of a little bit happier for you. There is something to be said for that. For those people who just want life to be a little better, they want to function a little better, they want to do this, they want to do that. There's nothing wrong with somebody just saying, you know what, I want my life to be a little more beautiful, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. But if you say, no, I really want to know, and I guess even what I said before, in terms of I do Shambhavi, take a moment and say, okay, like this is Shambhavi. This is, do I like it? What do I want to do? What do I want to do? How do I want to approach things? Like, don't think just because there is something that you should do the next thing, right? And I think that can be that it can be a trap in a certain way within yourself, not like each is setting a trap, like a trap within yourself, because I definitely see the value of not going from inner engineering to Samyama within 6 months and doing 3 Samyamas and the Anadi program within, that would have been like a year and a half of doing my inner engineering. There's value in, at the very least, making sure the next step is conscious of what do I want.
Wow. I think you gave a fantastic analogy with the fitness, because people can relate to it easily. Because in yoga as well, they say you are a hatha yoga teacher as well, if I'm not mistaken, right? So first it's pain, then it's torture, and then it's bliss.
Mm-hmm.
And so the experiences that people go through may be karmic. That's what people can relate to. So thank you so much for sharing that experience. Now moving on to another interesting aspect of your Kailash. So yes, you got to know there is this Kailash journey in comparison, whether you can go for the teacher training or the Kailash. Please continue.
So fascinatingly enough, I was in 2008, no, 2009, it must have been summer of 2009. A friend called me up and said, let's go to Kailash. And I said, that's okay. I've lived in the mountains. I've been to high mountains. And I had no interest. And he basically offered, he's like, it's not much money. I can cover you. I was like, I don't have any interest in going. So 2016, when my friend suggested Kailash, my thought was, okay, I guess I'm not doing teacher training, so we'll go to Kailash. There was no desire in me to see Kailash. There was none of this. And we went to Nepal first and hiked. Being in the mountains in Nepal is something incredible. You know, we were in, they call it the deepest gorge in the world, and you have the Dhaulagiri mountain up there at 25,000 feet. I don't know if the numbers are exactly right. And then you'll have Annapurna at 26,000 feet, and then we're at 13,000 feet hiking along, and just in this natural splendor, incredible. And we get to hike it with Sadhguru, so we get to like hang out with him and be with him. And it was beautiful. Like, it was absolutely a gorgeous experience, having satsang with him. And then we did that, I think 5 or 6 days. And then we flew to Lhasa in Tibet. And Lhasa is at about 11,000 feet. No, where we were in Nepal, we were on the Kalapani River. We were at about 8,000 feet. That's what it was. So Lhasa is 11,000 feet. And we took a day or two to get acclimated and saw Lhasa. Lhasa used to be where the Dalai Lama had his palace. I think it was his summer palace. So there's things to see there. And then we were supposed to get on a plane, fly to Ali, and then have a 5-hour trip to Kailash. But the Chinese government shut down Lhasa for a couple of days, the Lhasa airport, for some military training exercise. So we got on these buses and we drove 3 days, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on these buses. They would make us stop and get out and do the checkpoints and walk through. And the Chinese government would do all these things. And then, of course, they're wondering why Americans are in Tibet. Are you here to cause trouble, to, free Tibet and all that sort of stuff? We're like, we're not here for that. We're not here for politics. And I actually would tell people I was from Canada. No, I'm Canadian. It's okay. I'm not American. So we drove, and we were doing some sadhana on the buses, and it was just kind of grinding experience of being on a bus for 3 days straight. And we'd stop and have lunch and play frisbee for a bit, and then we'd get back up and get on the bus. And it was not exactly how I had envisioned this experience, but I think it ground me down in a way, because when we got to an Asarover and they open the bus and you step off those doors and there's this beautiful blue lake, and you look, and there's the hills in Tibet are these earthen hills. They don't look like the Rocky Mountains. They don't look like the stone mountains that we're used to seeing, the granites or anything like this. So you look, and then all of a sudden there's Kailash, and it's very, very clear what is Kailash. It doesn't look like anything else. And when I first saw it, the whole landscape started wavering, like it wasn't real. The whole, like, Kailash was there and everything was like waving like a mirage. It kind of became almost indistinct, like not a solid substance. And then I felt this rush running down my spine, and it just overwhelmed me. I sat there, and I'm sitting there just looking at it until some volunteer taps me on the shoulder. It's like, we need to go do something. And from there, every time I looked at it, and I would just sit there and stare at it like this, and then someone would come and tap me, and it's time to go, because I don't know how to explain. It was the first thing I bowed down to. It was immense. It was like truly bowed down to. I have no problem, this, going through the motion. But in terms of internally being overwhelmed by something to the point where I stopped talking. Like, I didn't talk for, I think, 4 or 5 days. And it wasn't, someone came up later and they're like, I didn't know you were in silence. I was like, I wasn't in silence. I just stopped talking. So it doesn't, to me, logically, I still can't have any grasp of what happened. Like, no clue how this peak could have such an effect. But it's not something that happened back then. In some ways, it's still this ongoing experience that if I talk about it or if I sit down and think about it, it's there. And there were certain things that, so Sadhguru was in his car, and I just had this urge to go to his window and namaskar him. And I'm not someone who generally likes to make a show of trying to touch his feet or, namaskar, Sarkar, like this. And sometimes there are people who do make a show of those things. So I'm sitting there in my head and I'm like, well, why do I want to go, bow to him at his window? And then I thought, you know what? I'm in Kailash on a trip. Why not? So I went, and he kind of gives me this look, and I went like that, and he did something. I don't know. I can't know what he did, but I just was gone. And I remember I came back like 10 or 15 minutes later, and I'm sitting there like this, and he's driven off probably 10 minutes ago. And, Yeah, Kailash is almost too immense to talk about. Like it's such a big thing. And in terms of, I had someone ask me this, they're like, well, you can bow down to Kailash like that. Why can't you bow down to Sadhguru like that? And on some level, I don't think it matters what you're bowing down to. On some level, is it, if this whole thing is true, that there's a certain oneness and there's a certain underlying thing and all that sort of stuff, if this whole thing is true, then it's not even what we think of as Sadhguru that we're bowing down to. What we think of as that. And that's something that kind of started coming into my life as I realized that, holding Kailash is up here and someone else is down here, where it's just that there shouldn't actually be a distinction. It should just be like, okay, I had this immense experience, but in some way, whatever's present here is present here as well. It may not be in my awareness that it's, or in my perception that it's there. So now I'm getting to where I can just kind of like anybody who's in front of me, I can just, all right, see them. Sadhguru says, see him as Sadhguru. I kind of be like, okay, I'll see you as Kailash for the moment. And so that's like Kailash shifted me in a big way. And I don't think I'm just glad it turned out the way it did. I don't want to say like this was my path or I was supposed to do this or I was supposed to do that. But if I had gone to Hatha Yoga teacher training that year, I would have never had that opportunity to sit there with it.
I can totally understand that it's so difficult to describe the experience that you had. And it's so difficult to describe Kailash in words, which I don't think can be done. And you also had some experience at the Mansarovar, especially if you go with Sadhguru. That's what I have heard. But because you have gone yourself there, I would love to hear it from you, the experience of staying over there, the sadhana, or um, I think he also does an initiation process over there, if I'm not mistaken. And what happened at Mansarovar? What was your experience?
He does a process. I don't know if it's initiation. It wasn't called that, but that doesn't mean it's not. So he does a process. He talk about we went and it was rainy, and so we kind of walked along the lake a little bit, but he said at 2 in the morning, if you wake up, don't set your alarm, but if you wake up, start doing a certain type of pranayam and like face towards the lake. So I remember I woke up, looked at my watch, it was 1:45, and I was kind of like, why am I awake? I'm so tired. We've been traveling all this stuff. Why am I awake? So it took me a couple minutes to remember that he had told us to wake up, or if we woke up to do this. So then I sat and faced the lake, and I was doing this, and it was like the building we were in became kind of hazy, and I could see the lake, right? And I could see these. They weren't exactly lights. They were kind of like lights, but they were like, I don't even know how to describe, like just kind of like along the surface of the lake, right? And you could see the haze on the lake. I could see the lights, and it was very, I don't want to say blurry, but it was just hazy. It was almost like smoky, like a cloud. It wasn't this thing. It was like, this is here. It was that. And so that was cool. But and Manasarovar is kind of a beautiful thing. But to me, Manasarovar is definitely, here. And Kailash is like it. Um, and that's just in my experience. It was cool. And I was like, okay, this is happening. But you talked about earlier about like something can happen, but if you're not changed, if you just go back, that was with the ayahuasca, something can happen, but if you're not changed, if you just go back into your normal life, what's really happening besides a little bit of entertainment? And to me, that's how Vanessa Rover was. It was like, oh, this is kind of cool and interesting, but at this point in my life, I'm not that interesting, cool, and interesting, right? Like I want profound.
Wow, that is so. With respect to this, how, if you can put it in words, then how would you describe yourself as Joshua who was before, who went to Kailash, and the one who came after experiencing Kailash?
On many levels, I experienced something that was beyond what I imagined possible. And I wouldn't say that I came back and it was all of a sudden like a shift like that. But I look over the last 7 or 8 years, one of the hard things is that I feel like it sped things up for me even more. So I didn't come back and everything was great. I actually came back and life experiences went even crazier for a period, to the point that I was telling a friend of mine about what was going on at one point. She's in Mumbai and she says, you know, Josh, I am the friend out of my friend group that my friends talk to and they're like, oh, my life is normal. And she's like, but you're that for me. I can talk to you and my life seems normal. So it's not that everything was beautiful. It's just that I got a taste of something else. And it really made me want that. You know, I want that. I want to, it sped things up. I want to know. So in hatha training, we go to these temples, right? We go to these South Indian temples. And I remember I was sitting in one, and I've been fortunate enough to go to quite a few beautiful places like this. But I was sitting there and it was vibrant. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, I had this realization. I was like, we can make ourselves like that. We can become that rather than going to a temple and sitting and getting the energy. Like somebody created this. And if somebody created this, then what they were was in some way, I don't want to use the word more, but do you understand what I'm saying? So I think that's what Kailash did for me is it made me, or it helps me to understand how small I've been living and how I want to live.
Wow, that was so profound. And what you mentioned just now about the temples, that somebody built it. And if we want to have that experience, we can just sit here and have it. That reminded me of one of the things that Sadhguru mentioned, which was Kailash is not in Tibet. If you want, it's here within you. So that was really profound. So thank you for sharing that. And so this also brings me, so you have done Hatha Yoga teacher training as well. And you have been a race car driver, or
I've not been a race car driver.
okay, but you have been
That
a
was my friend. Yes, I have raced. I've not
okay,
driven.
and you have been a coach for the kids as well for the swimming. You have been into yoga. You have been a volunteer, a practitioner who has experienced silence and different facets of your life. And you have been into different healing programs as well, etc. In any point of your time, have there been any kind of fear within you which you always wanted to get rid of? Has it ever been there? If it has, how did you face it?
In some ways, for a long time, nonstop. It was always there. There was always anxiety. There was always doubt. There was always this. And a lot of times I would just, you either let it rule you or you don't. But recently I feel like I've matured a bit and I'm able to just sit with it, and in some ways you see it's not me. The fear is there. If you fight it or even try to fix it, it doesn't necessarily go away. But if you allow yourself to just experience it and be where you are and say, okay, well, this is happening and I'm not going to try to change it. I'm just going to not even label the fear as good or bad. It's just fear. That's there. It's something that my mind is creating. It's something that my body is creating. So I'm just going to sit here with fear. And yeah, I'm scared right now. And it's weird because as that has happened for me, where I'm able to just sit with it, over time, it's really dissipated. Over time, the anxieties, the worries that I used to have, the cares that I used to have, they go, right? Because your mind can create all sorts of things. And if you realize that if you really see that it's just you creating them, and all you have to do is become aware enough that you understand how the mind works, and then you understand how not to create it, then it's simple. But the simplicity of it is kind of the trap to it, because people want something to do. What do I do with my fear? Do I do affirmations? Do I do this? Do I do that? And clearly it doesn't work. Clearly you can't talk yourself out of fear. But if you just, I was working with a really, really, really fast 13-year-old swimmer, and she was having some anxiety issues. And I had her just lay down, feel everything that's happening, and then remember why she loved swimming. Like she'll probably make at least Olympic trials in 2028, and possibly have a shot at the games. But had her feel it. And then we walked through in her mind, stepping up to the block, feeling that anxiety and realizing that anxiety doesn't mean that there's something wrong. The moment I would step out on before the swim and I'm just kind of loose and at ease, like, if you want to win, if you're going to win, you put all this time up, naturally there's some anxiety, right? And learning to just let yourself feel it and be like, okay, it's race day. This is part of it. Okay, this is that. It actually makes it go away a little bit. And then over time for me, it's gone. So it's basically gone. Like I don't have that much fear anymore, especially compared to where I used to. Like there's not that much doubt or anxiety. It's like, I'll do the best I can. If that's enough, something will happen. If it's not enough, something won't happen. And it's really just that simple.
That's a great analogy. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with it because it is not something that you just cut, remove, or do some affirmations and you come out of it. Those things does not work. So thank you for sharing that. And you have also been, into spirituality, not having the target that I want to go into spirituality or something. You just had questions, if I am putting it correctly. You just had burning questions, and you wanted answers to that. A lot of people, I'll just divide it into two parts. A lot of people are, first of all, afraid to ask those questions, that what will happen if I ask these questions? Or is it questions to myself? Is if I'm asking somebody, what will people think? And the second part is people who are looking for these answers, who have these questions, and who knows, okay, if I get into this path, maybe I'll find the answers. I'm also seeing the answers coming in, but they are having like a pull from the family or people around them. Hey, why are you getting into this path? you are just doing fine, you're going for a job, you're having a living, etc., etc. So what would you say to this group of people who are afraid of seeking the questions, and people who really want to get into spirituality but being pulled by the social drama maybe? What should they do?
So if you really have a question, I don't think it's a choice. Like if you're really looking around and questioning things on a deep level, I don't think it's a choice because you you can't not answer the questions. And the people who are kind of asking the questions, what happens if you don't? You don't ask these questions. You'll live life and you'll die and that's it. But you'll just know what you know now. And if you think that's enough, great. Like if that's enough for you, then wonderful. If it's not, then really seeing the questions that you have and that you don't know anything. And I think it's innate in humans to then start seeking, right? Like it's not something that needs to be instilled in someone to go seek. It's part of the human nature that you see that everything doesn't add up. In society, everything doesn't add up. What city are you in?
I'm in Mumbai.
All right. You look at the most wealthy, most famous people in Mumbai. Are they generally happy?
Mostly not. Mostly not.
Mostly not. So that doesn't add up. We're chasing things that doesn't lead to quality of life, that doesn't lead to happiness. So yes, if you ask questions, it could cause some disturbance. However, the questions are already causing disturbance. So within yourself, if you care about the people around you, find a way to do it gracefully, find a way to be inclusive of them, find a way to understand that if I'm in a family situation and I start going and taking yoga programs, I start doing this sort of stuff, I start getting up in the morning and spending an hour by myself doing practices, I need to be a little better to my wife and kids. I need to make them see you've stepped into this as a responsibility. So if they're allowing, and I use the word allow very, very loosely because I mean technically someone can't allow you to do something. But if you're saying this is what I want to do, then become the flower that makes their life better. Let them see that this is improving your life. Most people like turn it into something where you're fighting with someone. I got to take this. That relationship I talked about. Like it was like that. I would have to fight to go do my sadhana. And some people are there that no matter how beautifully you act towards them, they're still going to get mad at you. I remember I'd come home after work and she'd want to talk right away. And I was like, please just give me an hour. Let me do my practices and then I will. But she just she couldn't do that. Even though she saw at the end of the hour that I was like relaxed and happy and okay, let's enjoy our time together. She wanted it now. So there are people who are that extreme, but those people are the rare people. If you say you come home from work and you want to sit, you say hi to the kids or whatever it is, and you want to sit and you sit. And then once you get done with sitting, you're this pleasant person who's happier to be around and stuff like that. The majority of people in your life want to see you happy. They want to see you enjoying life. If you're better able to be involved with them, if you're more able to be conscious of their needs and what they want and how to water their and fertilize their soil, then they'll see it as a blessing. They'll be like, oh, this person is this. That's fantastic. And maybe at some point they'll say, oh, well, it seems to be working for you. Tell me a bit more about it. So I think for the majority of people, understanding that if when you start doing it, there's going to be a little bit of conflict because somebody's used to you being this way. But if you do it and they're enjoying who you are more, if you're more connected, if you're more like this, they're going to love that, right? They're going to absolutely love that, and it won't be a conflict. So it's your responsibility to understand that I am stepping away. Like when you marry someone, you make a commitment, right? And this is you kind of stepping away from that commitment a little bit, not fully, but you're going and doing something just on your own. And when you wake up in the morning in 20, 30 minutes or this or that, whatever it is, you're doing something just on your own. That can be a little weird for people. Why is he sitting in a corner by himself? Why is he, making these weird noises or whatever it is? So, you know,
To the people who
un-
are not understanding what this reference was, the noises just mean some kind of sound coming out from a sadhana. Yes, please continue.
some of the sadhanas have different noises, but if they see that you're reaping the benefit, if you're able to bring more pleasantness into their life, or if you're able to understand them and make the effort to, I think part of it can be effort. You look at this person, you're like, well, thank you so much for making the space in your life for me to pursue this. I'm going to, like, in whatever way, kind of touch your feet a little bit. The majority of people, it won't be an issue. It's when you're like, I'm going to go do this, and I can't believe you're questioning me. Why won't you let me do my thing? No, do you handle like that with anybody? If you want to get a fork out of the drawer and you just handle it like that, it can turn into I'm going to go get this fork, and I don't care if you want me to sit down and be in dinner or not. I'm going to go get this fork. The person's going to be like, why are you being like this? But if you just say, I want to try this. This is something very important to me. And you make that extra initiative to be more compassionate, be more open, when you're with the people, be there. I think the majority of people will see the value in that.
That's a beautiful way to put it. To be the flower who is blossoming and making the people around you who are there, their life also beautiful. So that's a beautiful way to put it. With respect to relationship, because you have seen both sides of the coin. So with respect to relationship, let's say people, there is too much of, talks going on. Communication is so important in relationship, etc., etc. A lot of things. I would like to ask you, how important is silence needed in your relationship with your partner?
I think in a relationship, there are two kinds of silence. There's a silence where you're inclusive of that person. There's a silence where, like, you don't have to be talking all the time, but that person is included in your life. That person is included in who you are. There's that silence. And then there's the silence that's like, I don't want to talk to you. You're out there. Right. And so there's two different ways to, or probably multiple ways. I don't know that it's just two, but there's multiple ways to approach it where if you can be very conscious with your words, conscious with your actions, this whole idea that we need to be texting each other all the time, we need to be calling each other all the time. I have some of the most important people in my life that I see once or twice a year, right? Maybe not even that. And, like in today's world, we're always on something. Something's always playing, something's always doing. And I think getting to where you're comfortable just being. And in a relationship, there's a silence that if the person needs to speak, that's allowed, right? That's allowed, and I will engage with you and we talk and we do this sort of stuff. But if the person doesn't need to speak, maybe you get to a point where you both don't need to speak, but you know that the conversations can happen, and when they need to happen, they will happen. I think that's a beautiful thing, that you don't have to. If you've been around someone for 20 years, you've had all the conversations, most of them that you need to have, right? But this idea that we have to be talking to communicate, even this idea that even if somebody, say you're eating with somebody and somebody gives you a plate, and you just kind of put your hand like, thank you, like these little things seem like such a big deal because it's vulnerable. being vulnerable and open and still being quiet can seem anxious to people. But it's actually a beautiful state, because if you're vulnerable and open and quiet, the person will just enjoy kind of your presence, and you can enjoy each other's presence and be in each other's space and not have. There's a quote by Rumi, and this doesn't exactly apply, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, but he says something like, it's something like, for somebody who loves with their eyes, like separation is intolerable. When for somebody who loves with the heart, there's no such thing as separation, right? And so I think if you put too much value on talk, then yes, you'll feel like if somebody's not talking, there's something wrong. But if you're just kind of quiet and there and happy and you're in each other's presence and you're still communicating, not even like this sort of thing, not like that, but you're just there's a communication. There's some level of communication going on. I don't know that it's necessary to always be talking. Actually, I wouldn't want to be in a relationship where you always have to be talking.
And I think what you're also saying is it's not just why you need to be 20 years in a relationship to be in that moment, even if you are new in a relationship and both the people understand who they are, just like you mentioned, being who they are. And even if you sit together in a room, both are silent and no words being exchanged, yet both are present together. And there is no budging and, hey, what's wrong with you? Why are you not talking to me? Or something like that. So maybe that also is a beautiful process. You don't always need to communicate with words, with writing, etc., against the normal notion that's going on nowadays that you need to just talk to resolve things. So this, you have put it in a beautiful perspective. Thank you for sharing
Has
that.
it resolved things? Like in the last 20 years, the world's gotten a whole lot more talking. What's been resolved?
I mean, the more talks, the more opinions the people are sharing. And to me, if I just have to put it in a very common term, just for my understanding or somebody, it is noise. It's so much noise to me. It does not make sense. It's like, even though those words have some meanings, for me, those are noise. So that's why maybe even during normal talks with my friends, etc., it used to happen when there was a huge difference. They started asking me, is everything okay? Why are you so quiet? Or something like that. Now, how can I explain? I'm not quiet or something. It's just, it is. I mean, I don't know what to say, but to answer your question, has it resolved? No, of course not. Things have become worse.
And I would even say that the problem is, or one problem is that the things that truly should be expressed, we don't have vulnerability and express them. We're talking about a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't matter, but we never actually express, how many times do you have someone that's close to you that you just, wow, it means a lot to me that you are here with me right now. These sorts of things. How many times do we actually make ourselves vulnerable and say, your friendship, what it means to me is like, I just want to say that. These things, or in a relationship, wow, I really, really appreciate you letting me do my sauna in the morning. Like this is such a wonderful thing for me, and I'm so thankful for you because of that. And facilitating that process, because someone you're living with can make something a grind, or they can make it easy. And let's not lie about that. Like somebody can, start to vacuum right next to you while you're doing it, or they can be like, okay, let's go in the other room so we can have quiet and peace. And I think if you take and you appreciate somebody and you express the things that need to be expressed, then all the other stuff is just fluff. There's so little that actually needs to be said. But the things that for somebody to understand, all the beautiful things about it that we just overlook. And then you just have all this talk and feel empty.